to Learning Unlocked. I'm your host, Britt Bingold. As an instructional specialist in Gilbert, Arizona, I'm a total nerd when it comes to classroom strategies and educational pedagogy. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. So today, as always, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Hey key holders, welcome back. Before we get started today, I just wanted to do a quick reminder again that if you have time to write us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would so appreciate it. The more reviews and ratings we get, the more educators see our podcast. So if you like what you're hearing and you think others would too, please head over and provide a review. Welcome to episode 7 of Learning Unlocked. Today we are discussing active learning experiences and how to leverage those effectively and efficiently to get the most out of that strategy for student learning. I am joined by my guest, Julia.salce, who not only is the most intelligent, brilliant, genius teacher I have ever met, but she also happens to be one of my very best friends. Even our daughters are best friends. And don't think I am just saying she's intelligent because she's one of my best friends, because legit, without her, I would not be where I am today. I would not be the teacher I am today. And she is basically the catalyst to a lot of my ideas. And I think I reciprocate with her, and we just feed off of each other. And it's a great, I'm just grateful to have her in my life. And she is so brilliant. So you guys are going to so enjoy this interview on active learning experiences and how to use them in your face-to-face classroom, but also how to use them in the virtual environment as well. Enjoy. Hey guys, today we're joined by Julia.salce, and I am so excited for the topic we're going to talk about today, creating active learning experiences, and not in just virtual environments, but also when we get back to those face-to-face environments. They're super important. So it's a great topic today, and I'm so glad you guys tuned in. Julia, how's it going?
It's going well, thank you.
Are you enjoying this weird, time where you're working from home / not?
It's really bizarre. You and I were just talking before about how uninspiring your home environment can be. So when I'm trying to create things, I'm not feeling very inspired in my home.
I totally get that. Yes, it's hard. I feel like you need to be able to feed off people to get ideas going. I mean, that's why you and I work so well together, is we feed off of each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just go ahead and just a brief intro for our listeners, a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, awesome. Well, so this is my 16th year in education, which really makes me feel old when I say that. I spent 13 of those years as a high school ELA teacher. And during that time, I kind of did the gamut of things. So I was an AP teacher, a department chair, and also even our district's secondary ELA coordinator. And though all of those things were wonderful and fun, I realized 13 years into it that ELA was not my passion. My passion was really the art and teaching of learning. So I've been blessed these last 2 years to work as a professional growth instructional specialist with you. And we get to feed off of each other. And just like we said before, we get to inspire each other. And I specialize typically in creating hands-on learning experiences to achieve rigor. So kind of that sneaky rigor, tricking students into really rigorous thinking by using things like manipulatives and games and stuff like that. And, in my free time, which I really don't have a lot of because I have a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old, but in my free time, I like to read. And right now I am trying my hand at redoing my master bedroom all by myself by repainting the furniture I have and rehabbing things that exist. And you know what happened the last time I used spray paint years ago. So this could be interesting.
However, I'm super proud of you. It's because she got this gorgeous new headboard and she wants to make sure all of her old furniture matches it. So I'm proud of you for going on and doing something new. I feel like that's what everyone's doing right now is even teachers are having to just try something new, either in teaching because it's virtual, or I feel like because we're stuck at home, we're like, let's rearrange this room and see how this goes. So I think everybody's doing that at its sub level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true.
Okay, so the burning question is, because I introduced it as active learning experiences, and people are probably like, what is this? What does this mean? So I'm going to have you first start by just defining it. Like, what is an active learning experience? And throughout the interview, we may call them ALEs, just to shorten it up a little bit. But just go ahead and describe what it is, what the research says about it, and how can they use it effectively even now in their virtual space, but maybe later down the road in their face-to-face classrooms.
Yeah, so active learning experiences is a mouthful. So I like ALEs. Really, it comes from, I used to call these learning experiences because I wanted students to be experiences of their learning. But if you were to go on Google right now and look up learning experiences, you would get a lot of simulation activities. So working on argument, and then the kids are doing like a mock debate or a mock trial. And that's not what I'm talking about. I didn't want to get rid of the word experience, but when you look online for the types of activities that I'm talking about or the types of experiences that I'm talking about, you'll see them referred to as active learning. So I put them together. I did my own mashup, and I like to call what I have students do active learning experiences. When we talk about active learning experiences, what I'm talking about is taking high yield strategies. So things such as reciprocal teaching, jigsaw, discussion structures, and pairing them with props or manipulatives to keep students active engagers in their learning rather than the passive way that we learn sometimes, which is sitting and getting, and all of the learning is happening at the front of the room, and the students are just kind of sitting there being passive participants in that learning.
And if teachers were interested, because you say high yield strategies, and I remember when I first got the position with you and Wendy, I was like, this sounds great, but I don't know what that means. I remember learning best practices. So can you explain where teachers, they're like high yield strategies, what are those? Where can I find like a list of those? Because I mean, are they the same as best practices? Like, how would you kind of explain that to, especially like a new teacher who's never taught
I think
before?
Yeah, I think best practices are derived from high yield strategies. So, high yield strategies is a term that's used, applied to the research that exists out there. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe high yield strategy, the first time I saw it was with Marzano. And he has a list of high yield strategies with things like comparing and stuff like that. And then when I talk about high yield strategies, I'm talking about most of the time the research of John Hattie in visible learning. And so if you're interested in that, you can look up John Hattie, Hattie, and visible learning. And you put those two together, and you'll get this whole gamut of studies that he's done. They've pulled together to come up with the effect sizes of different things that teachers can do in the classroom. And so when I talk about high yield, those are the two things that I'm talking about.
Great. And we can link those in the podcast show notes for everyone. So if they're more interested in looking into John Hattie and Marzano, and they're like, okay, I've been teaching for maybe 30 years, I want to know, or I'm just brand new and I have no idea what you're talking about, they can kind of peruse those and then kind of see how those mesh up really, I mean, perfectly with ALEs.
Right.
Okay. So active learning experiences, you kind of said they come from 8 elements. So can you kind of go through those a little bit with us?
Yeah, so I have listed out what I consider a process for creating these active learning experiences. So I would train teachers and they would come to me and say, these are great. How did you get there? How did you come up with these ideas? And so I went to I have a little planning book whenever I create stuff, and I kind of looked back at it and came up with a process for how I create active learning experiences. And so the first thing you do is you start with the skill. And the skill being, of course, what it is you want students to be able to do by the end of this activity. And then you move to the content. So what content do you have that pairs well with that skill? Now, we all know often in education, teachers will place the content before the skill.
Right.
So let's say I have this text, and what can I do with this text rather than I have this skill, what text works best? So it's always skill, then content.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to think about what amount of time you have, right? So because we have all the time in the world to get through all of our curriculum these days, right? So when we talk about these experiences, they can be as time consuming as you want them to be. So if you only have 20 minutes of a lesson to do an active learning experience, you need to know that up front. You don't want to plan all of this stuff and then realize, oh my goodness, I only have 20 minutes to do it. And it was a waste of your time to put it all together. So you could have anywhere from 20 minutes to a series of class periods. Then you go to my favorite part, which is the props. And the props are the things that take whatever it is that you're designing and make it hands-on. And we'll talk in a little bit more detail about this later, but the props are things like, paper plates or cups or strips of paper, anything that the kids can get their hands on. And then you talk about communication and you look at your directions. How are you going to take students through this learning activity? Is it going to be a series of scripted directions as they move to a variety of different stations? Is it part of a station rotation model? Or is it you as the teacher leading the communication or leading the activity in the middle of a direct instruction? And then we talk about the most important part that I feel like this is where when teachers talk about putting kids together collaboratively or just creating these types of experiences for them, is they sometimes forget making sure that they script out the student engagement.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing to make sure all students are participating in that activity?
Right.
And so that's making sure that you've scripted out what everyone should be doing at every moment. And that's even more critical in the virtual environment,
Mm-hmm.
that students know that they're not just passively watching what's happening on the screen, but that they have something they're accountable for doing at all times. And then this is the important part. When the activity is done, when you finish the experience, what's the individual accountability, right? So a lot of these are collaborative. They don't have to be, but a lot of them are, because collaboration is one of the most effective ways for students to learn, is in appropriate collaborative environments. But then how do you actually tell who knows what? Well, that's the individual accountability. So you've got to build something in. And I'm a big fan of writing to learn structures, whether that's summary structures or argument stems, or creative things like metaphor brainstorms, but ways that you can get the students to show you what they know, but it's an individual component.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last piece is really figuring out what you as the teacher have to prep for the activity.
So this is so different, because I think when people think I have them do activities, this is not I'm having them take notes while I lecture. This is not I'm having them just fill out a worksheet as an activity, or just even simple response things. Like, this is really in depth and takes a lot of prep, but once it's done, it's done. And I mean, if teachers use their professional learning environments or their data teams correctly, and efficiently, they could really have a lot of these created through the year if everybody would just take a piece of it, and it wouldn't feel heavy in teacher prep.
Yeah, and that's what we tell teachers all the time, is really collective teacher efficacy is one of those really, really high yield research components, and teachers working together towards common goals for students. Creating these types of learning experiences together will kind of reduce the amount of prep that you're having to do individually as a teacher.
Well, and it is the highest yield. I mean, I think maybe it's second now in John Hattie's, but I mean, we're talking about teachers working together actually impact students more than anything else because of these reasons. So ALEs is definitely, I mean, and if anybody that knows me knows that I love anything to do with loose parts and manipulatives in kids, because I feel like it taps into that part of their play brain. And so they feel like they're active. They feel like they're doing something with their learning right away, even after they've learned it, or maybe as retrieval practice later. So I obviously a huge fan of this. And you are a genius for meshing those together. I love a good mashup. Julia is really, really good at mashing up things together. And then I just come in and then I say, okay, well, if that's really long, let's just call it ALEs. And so that's all I have to contribute to this section.
It's funny. Well, I think you're absolutely right too. If you go back when you talked about we are not talking about kids taking notes. We're not talking about active participation.
Right.
It's part of the reason I don't like the word
I
active,
know.
active learning, because I think a lot of people take that as, well, my kids are copying down the notes
Mm-hmm.
as teaching. And that doesn't require any thinking on the students' parts. That just requires them being able to copy what they see. And so they can be thinking about something else while they're doing that. And even worksheets, you know how I feel about worksheets. Uh, that's
It depends on the worksheet, Julia.
it. It does depend on the worksheet. It absolutely does. I've seen some really good high level thinking directed worksheets, but if you actually break them down, it's because they have embedded ALEs into the directions that they're having them do with that worksheet.
Exactly. Yes.
This is not your typical ditto, you know.
Uh-huh. And that's
So
why
I think,
teachers need to be careful when they're looking at teachers pay teachers products too, right? Are these
yes,
products just worksheets or things to keep kids busy while you're maybe pulling kids in for small group or some feedback, or are these worksheets actually having them do ALEs within embedded in the worksheet? Then you're like, okay, now it's worth my money. Because I
right.
feel like sometimes teachers buy a lot of things on there, which I don't think is necessarily bad because you're trying to save yourself time, and I get that. But you got to really, really look at what it is and the description that teacher is putting on there to see if it's
Well, I think
something you
it's
want.
it's just making sure too that it's editable.
Yes,
Like the reality is that if you're starting with a skill and you're moving forward, you're probably not going to find something on Teachers Pay Teachers that is exactly what you need it to be.
right.
So they should always be editable. You should be able to go in and customize it. And then I think that type of thing is fine because all of the aesthetic stuff is done for you. So
Mm-hmm.
it's still pretty, it's good looking,
Yeah,
but you can now embed a little bit more rigorous thinking into what they might be asked to do.
I totally
Um,
agree. Yeah, because I always think like don't get too enthralled with how pretty it is. Make sure the the stuff on there is worth it and worth the time for your students. Okay, so we were talking about direct instruction kind of with note taking. And so let's talk about how does direct instruction and lecture and both these terms seem to be synonymous for some reason. And then both of them get really bad raps over the last few years of teaching. Like, you can't lecture, you can't stand up at the front of the classroom. Like, okay, we've all had teachers that are maybe really good at this and they're really good storytellers or they're just enthralled, they're just easy to listen to. But what would your suggestions be to teachers who love lecture? They're like, I love it, I don't want to break up with my lecture. Okay, they're not breaking up with their lecture. Okay, let's talk about lecture versus direct instruction first, and then we'll get into how ALEs can fit into that really nicely.
yeah. So the problem first with direct instruction is that it has become synonymous with lecture, and they are not the same thing, because the problem with lecture is that it's become synonymous with speaking for long periods of time.
Yeah.
So if you and I were to talk about, oh, we're going to go watch a lecture, we know that the presenter is going to speak to us, at us, for the entire time we're there.
Like in an auditorium or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And this is not what lecture has to be. In and of itself, lecture isn't bad.
Right.
It's how long it is that makes up that is the problem. So it's the time and the amount of passive listening that's happening from the audience that then turns it into a lower yield instructional strategy. So when we talk about direct instruction, we talk about lecture, and we talk about how those two are somewhat connected if we understand them correctly. What we are then looking at is short bursts of lecture mixed with ALEs,
Mm-hmm.
opportunities for students to be hands-on engaged in the learning process. So the teacher is the expert in the room. They have to speak. And I think a lot of times when we talk about these ALEs, or I'll put out displays of them for teachers to look at and get a feel for what kids could be doing, they panic and think, oh my goodness, but I have to teach blah, 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 blah before they can do that. Well, absolutely. It's just a matter of how long you're spending standing at the front of the room before you get to something like an ALE.
And what is that timing? Because we've talked about this, I think, in every single school we go to. How long should they be speaking before the students need to do an ALE of some type?
A good rule of thumb is their age in minutes, right? If you ask any kindergarten teacher, they will tell you this is abundantly clear to them. They get to about the 5 or 6 minute mark of speaking, and all of a sudden, like Susie's walking this way, and Marcus is sideways in his chair, and they can see their squirreliness. Um, Somewhere I think around like second or third grade, it seems that kids get really good at the self control, the impulse control for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And we stop getting those visual cues that they're mentally done so they can control their physical affect. But in their head, they're just gone. They're done after a certain amount of time. And so having a rule of thumb for our students based off of their age in minutes is just a good gauge for how long you should speak. It's not set in stone. You can go above it by a few minutes or below it by a few minutes, but it's just a good gauge.
I think that's a great, I mean, and I think any teacher listening to this right now is going, yep. Like, because even as high school teachers, I was able to see when I was losing them. The hand starts to go on the chin. They start to kind of lean over, or they lean back in their seats and start to stretch, and you're like, they're getting done. I gotta wrap this up, and we've got to do something before I can kind of come back and talk some more about what we're learning. And it's hard at first, I think, for new teachers to recognize those cues with the older students, because they are really good at what we call playing the game of school, right? Smile and nod, take my notes, listen to my teacher, get the A. This is how I do this. I basically go to school to see my friends or play sports or go do something in my club or get out of there, so I can get home and do whatever I want to do, play video games, whatever. So it's our job to make sure that, we are entertaining them to a certain extent. A lot of teachers hate that word, that entertainer word. But that's what we are in a lot of ways. We are entertainers. And if we don't think of ourselves that way, I think that's when we get into trouble, because that's when the kids start to zone out and start to really resent learning. And that's unfortunate, because we want them to love learning.
Right. Well, and if we don't think of ourselves as having some entertainment value for students, then we really just become knowledge experts that are like talking heads. There has to be some dynamism
Yeah.
to what we do in the classroom and how we deliver information to them.
Yeah, and they won't trust us without it, right? They're like, okay, here she goes again. She's just going to talk all hour, or they'll get really good at like trying to throw you off to talk to you about your personal life, because that's far more interesting than what you're talking about at the moment, and that's a big cue that you probably are. You need to wrap up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think to illustrate really quickly, because I think some people might be thinking like ALEs. I still don't quite understand what you're talking about. While we're talking about lecture and direct instruction, I think an example here would help. So let's pretend we're in science class, and in science, the teacher they're about to talk about all the different hazardous types of weather, because then they're in the middle of a weather unit. The teacher could go to the textbook, get all the notes, and stand up in front of the students and have the students just write down while he or she is speaking. The teacher could have the students go to the textbook and read and take their own notes from the reading.
Mm-hmm.
But neither one of those are active learning experiences. Instead, an example of an active learning experience that is in the middle of lecture, in the middle of direct instruction, could be something like this. At the start of the lesson, the students have a bunch of little pieces of scrap paper. And the teacher says, let's brainstorm all the qualities or characteristics of things that we know about hazardous weather. And the teacher could say an example of that would be wind, strong winds, heavy rain, whatever. And they start to, as a class, brainstorm, and they put each one on a different piece of scrap paper. And then the teacher starts with, okay, we're going to start with tornadoes. So let me tell you a little bit about the tornado. And the teacher goes through and then does her little mini lecture. And while she does that, the students are taking their little pieces of scrap paper and any of the characteristics that they have, they're sliding them over. And the teacher could even have the students place those in a cup that they've labeled tornado.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're getting all of their information sorted as the teacher goes, right? So then now they have tornado and they've got the characteristics of tornado. But what's cool about this is then the teacher could go on to hurricane. And let's say for tornado, we already dropped in the strong winds piece of paper. But now I can have them pull out their strong winds piece of paper and place it between tornado and hurricane. And we know that here's a common shared characteristic of the tornado and the hurricane. And so they start to make those comparisons and those similarities and differences. And all I'm using is cups and pieces of scratch paper.
Right.
So at the end, they've got all their cups filled. And then the last task is for them to go into their cups, empty them, and create their own notes. And one step better would even be visual notes based off of what they understand about each one.
Right.
The teacher is still accomplishing the same task, but how much more engaged and hands-on in the learning were the students in that versus reading a text and taking notes or just taking notes as the teacher talked. So that's really what we're talking about when we say active learning experiences. And that's how we take and make them an easy part of direct instruction and lecture. If you think about the prep on that, if you think about any of the changes the teacher really had to make to the lesson, if she typically just delivered it as a lecture, then they took notes, there's not a ton of changes on her part. All the change comes in is in what the kids are doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's just, I mean, if hopefully you have someone, maybe a parent helper or a teacher's aide. I mean, if it's that hard just to cut up paper, and we all have scrap paper lying around, just cut them into strips, get some cups, from the Dollar Tree or wherever you can find extra cups. I mean, I've had cups donated to me by like independent coffee shops before, because I'm like, I'm going to use these for activities in my classroom. Would you mind donating me some? And they're like, sure. And they gave me like 200. And I'm like, well, that was more than I needed, but that's awesome. And, so there's ways to kind of get these things too, that aren't expensive. And at the end of the day, that teacher can still collect their notes. It's just the notes were created in such a more engaging way than just sitting there and listening. And those kids are going to remember those connections more because they were involved in the process of the learning.
Yeah, they were experiencing the learning rather than just being passive observers of it. And in a digital environment, I advocate for props that can easily be found in homes. So as long as we're not talking about like kindergartners, or as long as you have plastic cups at home, they can use regular cups, right? You can just say for today's lesson, boys and girls, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to set a timer on the screen. I need you to bring 4 cups and about 20 pieces of little scratch paper. I don't even care what size they are. Right. You can quickly tear them into strips. They don't need to be pretty. And that's just part of their setup for the lesson. No different than taking out your notebook, opening up your textbook. So I think it's just moving beyond what we consider setup for learning to be. And as much as you can make it be on the students to set up, the better.
Right. And my second grader can go get cups out of the kitchen and rip up paper for her lesson. I don't need to set that up for, you know what I'm saying? So I think that would be really great for those kinds of age groups. So, okay, let's that was a great example. So let's just summarize that for people. So lecture mixed with ALEs is what makes up good direct instruction. Is that what we're kind of trying to get to?
Yes. You said that so nicely.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's because you wrote it down and I'm reading it from your script. But see how you just built me up, people. Isn't it wonderful? Yes. But I mean, that's really true. You're saying lecture's not bad. We have to provide that information. And I want to say it again. And I want to say it for the people all the way in the back, because teachers, for some reason, are like, my principal won't let me lecture. And it's not that they don't want you to lecture. You need to teach. They want you to know how long to lecture and then what to do to have the students be engaged and experience the content you're giving them, so that way they can develop the skill they need. So yeah, I think that's because a lot of teachers that we see are always like, yes, when we put, direct instruction up at the top, we're like, yeah, but let's think about what really that involves.
Right. And I think we had a campus refer to it once as a teaching tango. Like, you lead for a while and then the students lead for a while and then you lead for a while. And it's this constant back and forth interactive relationship that really allows students to remember the learning that's occurred in the classroom.
Well, and it creates curiosity because all of a sudden they're like, Miss Salce, I have wind in this cup. I do not want to take it out of the cup and put it into the next cup. So there's going to be more questions from your students. You know, sometimes
Right.
at the end of a lecture, a teacher will look at a class and say, "Are there any questions?" Well, they're not going to. No, they have all the information. Like,
That's so true.
so you're like, but if you're in the process of you've talked for a little while and now they're interacting with stuff, they're going to have more questions, and the more curiosity you can get out of those kids' heads, the better the learning. And this is, and I, you know, we both have young kids, but we taught older kids. So we taught high school kids. So overall, no matter the age group or content area, I think teachers find it difficult to create these ALEs because they're like, I am already so chock full of scope and sequences and priority standards and curriculum and all this stuff. I don't have time. And I don't know where to start, and I don't know why it matters. And I think just now we did a really good job of demonstrating why it matters. But I think right now teachers need to know, how does it happen? How can I, especially now in a virtual, and we can do virtual first, what does the family have at home to use? And then how can it be leveraged for rigor and relevant instruction? So if you could create a list of 5 items in the household that kids already have, and we kind of just talked about this with the cups and the paper, that they could use for ALEs at home during virtual learning, what would be your top 5 things and why?
So my favorite thing to use in the classroom, because it's super easy and it gamifies learning, which the students really love, is dice.
Yeah.
I think having dice, there's just a lot of flexibility in what you can do with them, and kids get really excited about rolling dice. So
They really do.
I think most households, or a good percent of households, have some type of board game that they can steal the dice from. And if they don't, for teachers to provide it for their students, dice are really, really inexpensive.
Right.
You can get a giant bag of dice and I'm talking giant bag of dice.
Like 500 pieces of dice.
Yeah, for under $20. So I think I love dice because all you have to do is assign a task to whatever number your dice go to. So if you're just doing one die, then you have 1 through 6, and there's an associated question or question statement stem, or writing to learn activity that corresponds with each of those 6 numbers. Or you could go all the way to 12 if you're rolling 2 dice. I recently saw something online, I think I shared it with you, Britt, last week, that it rocked my world because I've been using dice forever, but I had never considered doing multiple rolled tasks.
Yes, you shared it with me, and it rocked my world too.
Yeah, I'm like, why haven't we thought of this? This is genius.
And so 12 allows for so much more than 1 through 6.
Yes. And then you're mashing together things. Like, so nobody's task is the same.
Right.
So I made a sample one where basically if students were looking at different regions of the United States, they're studying this in social studies. The first time they roll 1 through 6 is assigned to a region. And so maybe they got the South. And then the next roll, you roll a second time, it's assigned to a task. So the task is to characterize the culture of this region. And that's what they rolled. And then they roll one more time. And on the third roll, it's assigned to how they're going to visually represent it. So in this case, it might be a concept map. And so now this student has rolled their own activity, their own performance task. And so they're going to look at the South. They're going to characterize culture of it, and they're going to represent that in a concept map. And so for a digital environment, using interactive Google Slides was a really fun way to do that. So if you're curious about that, it's really easy to do, and you can Google it and find some good YouTube videos to show you how to do it.
Yeah, it was really, really cool. She asked me to look at it, and I was like, this is awesome. And then she didn't give me editing rights, and so I couldn't do any of it. And then I emailed her back and said, I don't think it's working. And she goes, I didn't give you editing rights to move anything around. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not stupid.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, but yeah.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry. I think that was a key thing for me, though, if I'm going to show teachers how to make interactive Google slides, teachers never give kids editing rights to anything they share with them. So that's not second nature to teachers. It's like a red flag. Why would I let them edit this? Well, it's because you've frozen everything that you don't want them to move. So it was not intuitive to give you editing rights.
Right, which is something I revealed for you. See, I do a lot of great work. I also liked dice in the classroom too. I mean, I would have them roll dice for really simple things, like even just task oriented, like, okay, maybe we were reading a short article, so you're going to roll your dice, and at whatever your number is, that's the number of paragraphs you're going to read out aloud to your table. Or you could say, hey, if you're rolling a 3, you're going to annotate for this type of word choice. If you roll out, whatever, you can use dice for just so many different things. It's actually it's awesome. I mean, and I think a lot of teachers know it. It's just, they're like, where do I fit it in? And they just have to make time for it.
And it's so easy. I was even just thinking today, my daughter is still obviously online for school right now. And so they were reading a text, and the teacher was asking great questions. It was good text. But I thought, as I'm sitting there working, because we share an office, I kept thinking about, gosh, if they had rolled the dice and had one thing each of them were looking for or tracking in the reading, it would have just taken it. It would have increased the engagement. So,
they'd have to collaborate. They'd have to look at each other and say, okay, what did you get for this? Because I want to add it to my notes. What did you get for this? Because I want to add it to my notes, because they all are looking at different stuff. And so now they're having this awesome academic conversation about the text that they might have not had before.
Right. And they're actively involved while reading is occurring.
Yeah.
Which sometimes I think when reading is happening, or students are reading out loud, or they're kind of popcorn reading around, they get disengaged.
Right. You definitely want the rest of them to always have a purpose for when they're reading, while they're reading. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And dice help with that.
Yeah.
So
dice.
So the next one is envelopes. Probably one of those props that might be getting harder to find in the home, just because we don't actually send a lot of mail anymore.
Right.
But you can create your own envelope at home too, by just folding paper and gluing or stapling the sides. But so I love envelopes and scrap paper. It can be this great way for students to gather evidence actively while reading, listening, or watching content or information. And then I love what they can do is, so like if they're learning, let's go back to my science example, if they're learning about weather patterns or extreme weather, let's say the teacher is having them read the textbook. Well, they're going to jot down on a new scrap piece of paper every time something about each one of those, right? And they might have an envelope for tornadoes, an envelope for hurricanes. And then the teacher can have them empty those envelopes out and start to do some sorting and categorizing of similarities and differences after they finish reading. Or I know you and I loved to do the envelope pass in class. So when students are face-to-face, you can do a digital version of this, but it doesn't actually use an envelope, which is very sad.
I know.
But the envelope pass is basically there's a question or a task or something inside the envelope that the group reads, and they add their response to the envelope, and they pass it to the next table. And each table has a different envelope, so there's different tasks floating around. And then on the last pass, that final group takes everything out, takes the task out, lays out all the responses, and starts to do some evaluation of what pieces. They take out a highlighter and they start highlighting on little strips of paper. Well, this part of this one's correct. I like this part of this one. I like this part of this one. Okay, let's mash these together and make the best class response we can.
Right. And make the best answer we can to the task. And that kids loved that. And it's that sneaky rigor we talk about. Our tasks on those envelopes were difficult, and they are still considered direct instruction because we have created them. We have directed the instruction on each task. But it's really the kids that are doing the thinking. And we're doing more of that facilitating, walking around type of thing when they're doing those envelope passes, which is also kind of great about ALEs, because you can get a lot of formative assessment by just listening to their conversations as they're using these props, and then be able to give them immediate feedback, maybe even the next day or even in that moment while they're doing it.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because if we think back to if you're just standing at the front of the room and trying to get information out to them, or they're just completing worksheets, you really don't have that opportunity to see inside their heads. ALEs give teachers the opportunity to hear what kids are talking about, to see what they're thinking, to see how they might sort or categorize different things is very telling about what they know and don't know, or how they see the topic. And so
Which could be
that really is
completely
one of the
not how
best
you want it to
ways.
go.
Right. Yes.
'Cause you're
Yeah.
like, oh,
This
this
did not go.
this is not
I remember you're very logical, but this is not what we were thinking.
right. Or we maybe need to reteach this because I
Yeah.
didn't think you were going to say that, but okay. But, or it might be
Mhm.
the other way around. Sometimes we would think, wow, that was brilliant. And I didn't even think you would go there. How fantastic. And you
Yeah.
have that, but it's immediate feedback, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can see a lot.
You can see it. Yeah, it is. It's making their learning visible, which we also talk about a lot, is how can you make that learning visible to you and to them, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Envelopes, one of my favorites. Yes. Okay.
I know. Yes. Love it. So paper plates. This one's pretty easy and straightforward, and I did not think of it. It never occurred to me to use a paper plate. It was a kindergarten teacher, a phenomenal kindergarten teacher that told me about it, and she uses paper plates to create thinking maps.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, that's brilliant. So, you just lay them out and most houses, and again, you could use real plates as long as they're staying on the table. So if you don't have paper plates at home, when you're working, doing all this digital stuff, you could have the students use real plates with mom and dad's permission or support. But really you lay them out in different configurations. They become your bubbles of your bubble maps of all the different bubbles you could make. And then you put strips of paper between them or string between them to connect them. And then you start adding information to the paper plates. And what I love about the paper plates for the littles is that they can draw pictures on each plate.
Yeah.
So if they've just read this story and now the teacher wants them to go, list all the main characters in the story or draw a picture for all the main characters, how much more visual is that for them to see like main character at the center of the table and all these paper plates around it, or these pictures they've drawn of the main characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I love paper plates for that. And then cups. This is, again, it's just a way to to have kids like put information into something that they can then do something with later. So I love cups because they allow you to, first of all, they're vertical. Anything that comes off the table is a lot more engaging and interesting because students don't typically deal with vertical objects in class. Most of it's flat, from books to paper to things like that. But so I like cups for that element of it. And then there's a lot of different things you can do with them. Really, it's just sorting and hands-on movement of paper. But I love it for, at the end, one of the things that I've done in class is I'll put colored dots on the bottom of the cup. So let's say we were looking at question words like who, what, when, where, how. And there were cups for each of them. And each one had a different colored dot on the bottom. That was for me. The kids didn't even know it was there. And they have all these strips of paper from the story they've just read. And then they're sorting, like one strip of paper says mama. Well, that goes in our who spot. One strip of paper says, I don't know, the planes, and that goes in our where spot. And so they sort all these pieces of paper into the cups. And on the bottom of the cups, the next set of directions is look on the bottom of the cup and grab the color dot that matches your colored dot. So if I seat students, if they're not with playing cards matched around, each student has a different colored dot in a group. So I have a red dot, a green dot, a blue dot, and a yellow dot. When I seat them, I put my low in the yellow, my lower learner in the yellow dot, and I put my higher learner in the red dot, right? So I have the high, low, the medium high, and the medium low. Well, then I sort I then have them take a cup that fits their ability level. So like my lower level learner sitting in my yellow spot always, I say, hey, grab the cup that has the yellow dot, and they get the who cup.
Right. And they go back to their desk maybe, and this is and you're blowing everyone's mind right now. And we're just talking about we're just talking about the little sticker dots that come in that huge, like that big Avery pack. This is not sponsored by Avery, but it should be. Okay. But that little dot, those sticker dots, and if you don't want to put them on the desk that day that you're doing that activity, you could just stand by the door and stick them on their shirt or whatever and say, this is the dot you need to have for this lesson today. Just don't lose it.
Or have the paper. It could even just be on the paper you give them with the directions, the individual thing. It could be right there.
Right.
And you know which students are getting which dots, because that's important. Because if we look at the gamut of, like, this is a first grade activity and you're going to have them go back and they're going to actually write the question, who was this story about? And now they're going to list out like mama, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah, blah from what they have. Well, who is super easy to do, but the why cup, why did the author write this story,
Yeah.
becomes a lot more challenging. And so you don't want the why cup going to your struggling reader, your struggling learner in ELA. You want the who cup going to that student too, so that they can gain that skill and move up to the next step. So it's just a way to, I like cups because it hides the dots underneath. They don't know they're there. And they do this activity of sorting together, but then they take the cup that matches their ability level, which I think is great.
Yeah, because it's hard, I think, to fit in differentiation all the time, and this is a great way to do that. And then you can level the kids up as they get a hang of it. Because a lot of kids may come in and say, "I'm not good at math," or "I'm not good at English," or whatever it is the subject is that they feel they don't have a great self concept in. And if you do little things like this sneakily, they don't realize that they got the easy cup. They're thinking, "Oh, I can do this. I can write this little short summary of who was in the story." Like, and another kid's like, "Oh, I can do this. I can totally do where the where was or the when." And so every single kid is now really engaged in something they feel good about. And the more they feel good about how they're learning in your class, then the more excited they are to get there, the more interested they are to learn. And they actually just get better at learning because they have that self-confidence.
Well, and they don't put the walls up at that point then when things get a little challenging. They're not quite as hesitant because they've gained that confidence.
Well, and they've already kind of discussed it as a team. They've already sorted as a team. So that pressure's kind of off too. And yeah, so they're not feeling like, "Oh my gosh, is this wrong? Did I put everything in my cup wrong?" They're like, "Well, my team, we all kind of discussed this. So I feel like it's probably right." And that makes them a little bit less stressed and anxious too.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And so then really the last one is strips of paper or sheets of paper, tape, and a vertical wall. So I love to use the sliding glass doors. So all last spring, when my daughter was home after they closed the schools, she was doing different reading tasks and she was building toward writing these paragraphs about something that had occurred within the text. And so one of the ways that I had her really start to visualize all the evidence that she had and what she could do with it was we used the sliding glass door and we just taped whole pieces of paper to the door and she would start writing things on them. And then I'd have her grab the highlighter. Okay, we'll go to the question you're going to be answering in this paragraph. Which one of these things fit that? Let's highlight that. Okay, let's cut out and pull those highlighted pieces together. And now is there a certain order that makes sense that you might talk about these things in response to that question? And then she could rearrange them on. And so it was very vertical, it was very visual. I could see her thinking the whole time. And vertical learning is actually really huge with students. It takes them away from their kids can hide when they're flat down on a desk in a classroom. They can kind of hide over their work.
Yes.
And so it's easy to miss things that are happening. But if work becomes vertical, students take a lot more ownership and pride in what they're putting up because it almost feels like this is a poster for people to see. Now, of course, you build the classroom environment where they feel safe and they trust, having their work up for everyone to see, even if they get it incorrect. But that's just another easy, hands-on, engaging way that doesn't require anything except paper and tape.
Yeah, and I mean, and the more, especially in math, and I mean, any content area really, but I've seen it work really well in math is that vertical learning. That vertical, let's put it up on the wall, and maybe there's groups of 4 kids at each, poster board around the room, that you have them all working on maybe a similar problem. And just having them all just walk through and discuss and have ideas. And maybe if we did it this way, or maybe it's a series of different problems and then they rotate around the classroom and they're look at, hey, this one was just a little bit different from ours because of this reason. And, oh, they solved it this way when we did it this way. I think is awesome. You could do that so many different ways. And it's more than just a gallery walk at that point. It's really like the learning has been taken up off the desks and even it is on display. And I like how you said add a highlighter then, and then maybe they sticky note something, and then it's like layered as well. So they can see their learning happening because they started with this and then we highlighted that and then we sticky noted this part of it. And the more I think they can see that progression, I think you're right, is awesome. So, okay, 5 things. We've got dice, envelopes, paper plates, cups, and then some type of paper taped to a vertical space for students to learn. And those are great, just hands-on, hopefully household items that teachers could use for ALEs at home during their direct instruction time, because we know now that lecture plus ALEs is direct instruction. And we also know that they only have so much time to talk, even in their little 45-minute lesson virtually right now, before they need to have them do something with one of these things. So I think this is great and encouraging for teachers to think about, shoot, I've just been talking and having them watch me do the math problem live virtually and kind of having them do it with me on paper, which is great. But what else? How could I throw in some paper plates, or how could I throw in dice to that? And then just getting them to think a little bit might help some teachers that are feeling a little, I don't know, down in the dumps. I don't know how to say it, Julia. Just like a little burnt out about the virtual learning.
Well, I think the thing with virtual learning, and I feel like every time I do a training, I walk away feeling like I've just talked to a wall for 45 minutes, right? Because it's so hard to read facial expressions on a camera, and then
some of the kids aren't even putting on their cameras.
So it feels somewhat dead. And I think even something as simple as, okay, you've worked this math problem for them, they've copied it down, they've done a couple, you've checked that they kind of know what they're doing. Get those dice out and use those dice to generate the numbers that go into their next set of problems, right? Even if a kid is like still doing the same thing you were having them do, but they're rolling the dice to get the numbers. If it's like, they're working on addition, you were doing 5 + 5 and you were having them draw out the pictures and or the math mountains, whatever. Now they can roll the dice, 2 dice, and okay, I have 4 + 3. So now I'm going to do 4 + 3 and I'm going to map it out. It becomes more engaging. You've gamified it a little bit, just to get them really active in that process.
See, this is why I love you, because you're just so brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's just so reasons I love you. But yes, I think
you're crazy.
Because really, I mean, that's really a simple add to a teacher's live lesson that really could make or break that live lesson. The kids would be like, "Oh my gosh, today we rolled dice," and and then when they go to do that homework piece, or they go into the curriculum to do that piece, they might they remember it more, because instead of just watching it passively, like kind of like a TV show, they've really done something active.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So great. You've got your top 5. All right. Pick, there's so many, and you've talked through so many of them. Is there like any other examples, like that teachers could use to creatively and like innovatively build these ALEs? Because I think you've got a lot of people excited now. Mm-hmm. I think they understand, but then they're like, okay, I teach Spanish. Right. You know what I mean? How am I going to do this with, their words like that they're learning or whatever? So like, how can they make these things come to life for their kids? Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So I think instead of another example, because I think we've gotten quite
we've done a lot of examples.
It's more really, teachers just have to look at, so if we look at those top 5 props, we have to recognize the structure, the potential structure they represent, because each of them ultimately just represents a structure. Okay. So if we're talking about dice, right? If I'm in Spanish class, I could be thinking about, I'm going to have them roll a conversation starter, Spanish starter stem that they have to finish with their partner. And so that it's just, they know that dice is assigning a task to a number.
Right.
Envelopes and cups are both about gathering information, either for trading or passing, or just for later sorting and categorizing, again, in a different way.
And then doing something with it individually too, right? Because we want that individual accountability piece to give the teacher, especially in virtual learning, you're turning in assignments. So, you could easily take a picture, that a parent could take a picture, the student could take a picture of their sort or whatever they did and submit it to the teacher. And a really easy way, I think a lot of kids don't know, is they try to take it with their phone camera and it's all shadowed and you can't see it. But if they use their notes app on their phone, there's actually a scan button on there, and it becomes it looks like a scanner.
No way. Really? I did not know this.
Oh, you did not know this? This has been my life. I did not know this. This has been my life, girl. So if you go into notes and you click on like a new note, at the bottom, it'll ask you if you want to scan it.
That's so good to know. I've been using like a scan PDF program instead.
Yeah, so you'll just
But
be like,
yeah, that's good to know. We'll see.
uh-huh.
Wealth of
Yep,
information.
you go to the camera and then it'll say, and do you want to take a photo or do you want to scan the document? And I think if kids knew that and more teachers knew that, and obviously now you know that,
Yeah.
then you can do any of these things virtually and have them just
Mhm.
scan it in and submit it, and then you're good.
Yeah, and I always like for especially once they can write, and
Right,
read and write
right,
well
right,
on
right.
their own. I also advocate for making them take whatever they did and extend it one layer further, and that becomes their individual accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So you take your whether you're looking at the weather patterns and you've done that sorting and you realize that some weather patterns have similarities. The final extension piece is even just the most important thing I learned today was,
Right.
and for example, when I did this, blah, 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 and because it showed me this, that's why it's the most important thing I learned. Them being able to articulate for you their little aha moment for the day
Mm-hmm.
is a great way for you to get that individual accountability piece. So it doesn't have to be overly complex either.
And they can do
But
that on Flipgrid. They could, scan it into a Flipgrid and then narrate over top of it what they learned.
mhm, I love that.
And then
I
you've
love that.
got kind of that mashup of I did it on my counter at home, and here's what it looks like. And let me explain for you how I did this and what I learned from it.
Right.
Yeah. And so envelopes and cups, definitely gathering information. But again, remembering, even with dice, even with paper plates, especially for the older kids, take that one step further and make sure they have that individual accountability, where the littles could probably just, mom could take, or mom or dad or whoever's working with them at the end of the day could just take a picture of the sort,
Right.
and scan it in and send it for sure.
Yeah. So, and I think when we talk about these experiences, the most important thing is remembering that you start with a skill. There has to be purpose to this.
Mm-hmm.
And that you really map out what are those learning expectations? How are you going to have that student engagement? How are you going to make sure that they are all involved and that you're able to figure out what each of them knows in the end? And that's really, you then take the structure that these props represent, and that's all they represent. The paper plates, the cups, they just represent a structure in which students can manipulate their learning. So you give them the structure and you let them go.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's important to recognize that in order for this type of learning to be successful, you have to have a culture that celebrates failure as much as it celebrates success.
Say it again.
So you have to have a culture that celebrates failure as much as it celebrates success.
Well, we both taught AP language together, people.
Yep.
Okay. This is like, we would say this to our kids at the beginning of the year. We expect you to what, Julia?
To fail. They would look at us, their eyes would get really big. I'm like, yep, you are going to fail in this class. And what's more is I need you to fail in this class.
Yep. And they will look at us like,
we're
going to fail. And we're like, yeah. The whole class. Because they're like,
everyone's
we
going
already
to fail.
have F's. What's happening? And we're like, no. And these are the kids that are like the A students who are like, we need you to fail and fail often. Because otherwise we don't know where this road's going to take us and what we need to teach you. And I think that's something that kids automatically go, oh, I don't have to know everything. I feel like a lot of kids are so afraid to fail.
Right.
I think a lot of teachers are afraid to fail.
We've created the the grading system makes failure this really horrible thing. But if you create that culture, the class mantra is we can only learn by failing. We learn more from failing than we do from succeeding. And we all know that's true. That's just a big life lesson.
Oh, yeah.
We learn way more from our failures than we do from our successes. And so I think you set that culture from the beginning. Even in these activities, like we said before, we're hoping they're going to go a certain way. We think they're going to go a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes they fail miserably. And even that tells you so much.
It does. Yeah, it does. And the kids will look at you like, this isn't going well. And you're like, it's not. And it's okay for you to say, we're going to stop. And I'm going to kind of go over quickly what I really wanted it to be. And then I think tomorrow we're going to try it again. The respect that you're going to gain from those kids, I mean, you are going to seem so credible in their eyes because they're going to see you not only as human, but also as vulnerable and also invested in their learning. Because
right, and someone who's willing to fail
with them
themselves.
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
we all fail
because you make these learning experiences sometimes and it's just you think it's going to go great and it doesn't. We've all, I mean, Julia and I both have, and it was funny, we'd run across the hall and say, well, that was great, good luck in third hour, because my second hour that did not go well, you know. Or we would tell each other, hey, tweak this, this, and this, and this, and then you'll be good to go, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest of
the end of the day, it was perfect,
right? And by the end of the day it was perfect, but that poor first hour we'd have to
for your A hour.
Yeah, it was my A hour.
6:30 in the morning group.
That poor, and they were all so tired too. Poor kiddos. Okay, so maker spaces, really fast, because we're kind of running out of time. But they're getting these tractions in schools. And I feel like this kind of fits in with that whole idea. But what we really want, because I know a lot of teachers are like, we got to get them prepared for this high-paced, high-tech, fast-paced culture. I mean, we're already there, people. We're doing it right now. Okay? They're all virtual. They're very high-fat, everything's going on. Let's go lo-fi. We can go lo-fi on virtual learning. We can go lo-fi in the classroom, right. So what's your response to those teachers that are like, it's a fad, it's a trend, ALEs are a fad, it's a trend, the pendulum will swing again? What do you think? What would you say to them at the end of the day?
Well, I think you know me, I'm not the person to jump on any type of trend,
which is totally opposite of me,
or design or education. So I'm always cautious of any types of trends. And so I think, I can sometimes be that person that's like, oh, this is just a trend. So what I'm always looking for when I see something new come out in education is, what's the purpose of this activity? Is the purpose of this activity that it's fun and creative? Then I'm not necessarily buying into that, because I think there's other ways to be fun and creative and purposeful. Mm-hmm. And so I really think it's how the maker spaces are set up, how they're designed, or the ALEs, how they're set up, how they're designed. That, again, we go back to what I said in the beginning, that it's clear that it started with an understandable learning outcome, a skill. Like, what is it that you're looking for? What is the skill they're going to be acquiring in this type of environment, or in this particular activity or experience? And in a makerspace, which is much more open than an ALE might be, mm-hmm. how do you do that without limiting the creativity? Because the creativity is what drives the makerspace. Right. So there's that balance that has to happen there. But I think ultimately, anybody looking at anything that seems trendy or new coming down is, can they find the purpose behind it? And if the purpose behind it doesn't seem like academic driven, then it's one of those things that looks really good, and it will become one of those trends that just floats on by.
Right.
But if you look at it and you're like, there's a distinct purpose to this, and I could definitely use that in this, this, and this, then it becomes not a trend. It becomes an educational advancement.
Right.
And so that's really what I say to people that are skeptical, because teachers are skeptics. There's a lot coming at us
all the time.
Mm-hmm. And one year they'll tell us this, and the next year the research will say this, and the next year, even the research we look at changes mm-hmm. within the year.
Yeah.
So it really is, you have to become really good quality you have to decode and decipher what's coming at you. And I think that purpose-driven piece of it, that's where you can find what's going to stick around and what's going to come and go quickly.
Yeah, and I think, and your process is great, because, it's that skill first, then they go to the content, which I think is the opposite for a lot of teachers, right? They look at the content that they've loved for so many years, and they're like, how do I shove a skill into it, right? Mm-hmm. And we get that, but that goes, that skill goes there, and then the content, and then what comes next after that? Remind me.
So it's skill, and then it's content, and then it is
time.
The time.
Right. Okay. So,
and then prompts.
And the time, it can be over a couple lesson periods, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I don't want teachers to think that it has to be over.
Yeah. It can be quick too, right? Okay.
Yep. It can be either one. So then it's the props.
Which is the favorite, because that's when, as a teacher, you get to do the thing that teachers love, which is create. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's the fun part. And then communicating those directions.
Right. The direct instruction.
Yep. How are you engaging all students while it's happening?
Okay.
What are you doing for individual accountability at the end? And then overall, what's the amount of teacher prep that needs to be done?
Okay. And then I love these questions that you always talk about when you make any activity, when you are doing any type of teaching. you always say if someone walked into your classroom and they asked you if they asked a student these questions, then you know that student knows exactly where they're going. And I
Yeah.
want you to say those questions because I think that would be a great way to wrap up, active learning experiences for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone walks into your classroom and they ask a student, they want to find out what the student knows about what's going on. Really, if you have a visible learning outcome targeted classroom, I should be able to ask any one of your students, what are you doing? And they should be able to answer me. Why are you doing it? And after they say, because the teacher said so, I ask, well, why did the teacher say so? And they'll answer that. How will you know when you get it? And then finally, how will the teacher know when you get it? So those are the 4 questions that in any time in an ALE or in any other type of classroom setup structure, students should be able to answer those 4 questions all the time about the learning that's occurring in their environment. And if they can't, they don't have clarity, or the teacher doesn't have clarity in why they're doing what they're doing.
And then for students, it just seems like ALEs are great, but none of this connects together to what I'm supposed to overall be learning.
Right. We don't want students feeling like every day is a series of isolated learning experiences, which I think if we think back on our own education, I know if I think back, that's what it felt like. Like that was Monday's activity. I have no idea what it has to do with today's activity.
That was
Because there weren't objectives when I went to school on the board. There weren't standards. There weren't any of those targets. And so it really was just kind of content and products. Like we're going to make this product and we're going to use this content and okay, let's go. So we want kids to actually see that everything they do builds and ties together. Because when they can see that, when they have clarity on that, they have a higher tendency to remember it longer because they realize this is information that's not just for Tuesday, that I can sleep Tuesday night and wake up Wednesday and brain dump it.
Right.
This is information that I'm going to need. So I need to put it in long-term memory so that I have it as we move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, so all of this is awesome. I think everyone that is going to their minds are blown, right? Because it's a lot of information we just threw at them. But
yeah,
active learning experiences, you can do it virtually, you can do it in class, but at the end of the day, you need to be doing it, right? Because without it, you're running that risk of being in danger of either the lecture where you literally look like you're the teacher on screen and you are the television. I've seen photos going around of kids completely asleep in front of their screens during active learning. I've seen kids on the floor asleep during virtual learning this year. And parents think it's funny, like they're taking pictures like, see how great this is going. And I'm like, okay, that's a 2-part issue. But, as the parent, I wouldn't allow my child to do that. But as the teacher also, we don't want them to be passive listeners. Because that will, that's kind of, I think, why a lot of virtual learning is, teachers and parents and students are struggling because it's really hard to mix that hands-on. And that's why I wanted you to talk about what's around your house that most kids have that they could throw in and do something cool with in the middle of your live lessons that you're teaching. Because I think that would really wake those kids up and help the whole learning process for everyone.
Yeah. And I think that's the key there is you don't give them the opportunity to fall asleep or to disengage because like you're going at a pace and their hands are busy constantly.
And if their hands are busy, their brains are busy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So if listeners want to learn more from you, where can they find you? So obviously you're going to be in our district course catalog, which anybody that isn't in our district can also take classes, right? So they can look those up on our website. If you're in district, obviously you can look that up through Frontline. And we do have our social media outlets, but is there anything else that they can do if they've got questions on ALEs? How can they contact you? Because I'm sure.
Yeah, so they can always email me at julia.salce@gilbertschools.net. And then you're talking about the digital or our PD course catalog. I'm actually in the process of creating active learning experiences digital PD.
Oh, awesome.
So they can watch for that as well.
So now it'll be on the Employee Hub under the digital PD on demand page.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you. You're my favorite.
Yeah, this is so fun.
Smartest person I know as far as education, and brought me to where I am today as an educator. So I love you, and I thank you so much for coming on to this new adventure that I've kind of thrown myself into and
Well,
supporting
this
you.
adventure is awesome, and this was so fun. Thank you for bringing me on. I was a little nervous at the beginning, but I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Well, because it's your jam, girl. This is it. You are the queen of active learning experiences, and I love our new little ALEs. We can talk about ALEs all the time. So,
yep, absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about active learning experiences, or as we're going to call them, ALEs. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's at GPS PROF GROWTH. If you have listened today as a GPS educator, you can receive PD recertification credit by visiting our Employee Hub page and navigating to Digital PD on Demand. For more information and resources from this episode, please visit our website at learningunlocked.libsyn.com/website. Libsyn is spelled LIBSYN. Thanks again for listening, keyholders. Keep unlocking curiosity, creativity, and innovation within your students. I'll see you next time.